SmartyPants out there. My name is Chastity Carr, and I am affectionately known as the tiniest teacher. Today, I'm coming to you to bring to you the top 5 ways to get your students engaged and keep it that way. All right. So tip number 1, you need to meet them where they are. Meet them halfway. Our students today come to us with a variety levels of learning. So some of them come to us with a wealth of knowledge, some of them come to us with minimum amounts of knowledge, and some come to us as blank slates. And so we have the responsibility to shape and mold those students into what we know they can become. So when I say meet me halfway, meet them halfway, that means wherever they are when they step into your door, that's where you teach them from, that's where you meet them at. I'll talk to you about an experience that I had with one of my former EL students. He is a non-English speaking student, came to us from Honduras, had never had too much schooling. And so when he did arrive, he was very shy, very reserved. One thing that I noticed about him though, he had the most amazing smile. So as I always do, I greet every student at the door every day with a handshake and a hug. That's my signature. It's been my signature since I was first starting to teach. I love to greet my students at the door because it lets me be able to see how they are coming into my classroom. Are they upset? Are they sad? Are they happy? Do they want to share something that happened to them from the day before? Most times kids tell me everything I'm going to need to know about them as they cross the threshold of my door that day. So back to Ellie. My student from Honduras was so sweet. As he walked in, I said, "Hi, I'm Miss Carr. Welcome to the cafe." And he looked at me and he said, nothing. He just looked. So I wondered, okay, I'm getting a student who cannot speak English. How do I reach him? I said, welcome to the cafe, gave him his hand in his hug and his handshake, and I let him into the room. Well, a few days later, the EL teacher came in and she told me, she was like, "Hey, Chastity, I found out that he loves Batman." Oh, I use this to my advantage. Everything that I planned for him had some attachment to Batman in it. When I thought about teaching lessons with him in the whole groups and the small groups, I thought about ways I can make the connection to Batman. Shortly after that, he began speaking in sentences and phrases and even reading in the decodable text that we were using. All because of his love for Batman. So what I did with him was I met him halfway. I met him where he was. This was important because in meeting him where he was, I was able to get him engaged in the learning. I was able to get him talking and asking and answering questions. I was able to get him to see that it was going to be okay and that this was a safe place for him to take risk and not be afraid to speak and not be afraid to interact with me or his classmates. All right, so tip number 2, let out your inner child. When I talk about letting out my inner child, I've never let go of that. Being a 2nd grade classroom teacher, it is important that your kids have to be able to see you get a little silly, get on their level, and that you know things that are hip and cool going on in their lives today. So some of the things that I like to do to get my students engaged is sometimes I bring in props. So I'm going to share a few props with you today. So we always have some silly glasses. I have tons of silly glasses. I go to the dollar store and I pick up all these little really cool glasses and I like, oh yeah, I'm gonna use those. In those dollar stores, you can find so much cool stuff. Sometimes I purchase things online, like when we're doing reading groups, I purchase little finger lights so that when the students are reading and tracking, they have things that they can utilize to help them. During Halloween time, we use our witch fingers to read with. All right, the kids love these things. And even past Halloween, they want to use the witch fingers, okay? All right, and then sometimes I make these little eye catchers for tracking as they read, and I just take a little eyeball and I hot glue it or glue it with some tacky glue to a popsicle stick, and we use that to keep them engaged during reading to self or reading to someone. And some other things that I do to keep my students engaged. Dollar store again, I put little notices in front of them when I see them working hard. I'm like, oh, you're a whiz kid. Oh, you're a genius. So then they have their little thing and everybody in the classroom knows that they're doing something special. Another thing that I love using when I'm teaching is my finger pointers. I have all kinds of these in all different colors. All right. Top-notch things to keep your students engaged and let out your inner child is get to know the things that they like. So I had a group of kids when the flossing dance came out that they love to do the floss, and they were doing the floss at any time during the day, specifically during time to line up. And it was driving me nuts because I like my kids to line up flipped and zipped and making sure that they're quiet. Well, that was no longer happening. So we decided as a team that we could get these kids to get excited about flossing and having fun with their flossing dance, but we had to find a way to fit it into our day. And so what I decided to do was, if students made an A or a B on any assessment or any test, at the end of that day, we would have a flossing contest. And they would get to floss, and I still can't floss, okay? They would get to floss and do that in front of the whole class. And guess what? Over a course of period of time of them doing that, the flossing stopped in line, and it just became a thing that even I would get up and floss and they would all laugh because I couldn't do it. They would laugh. Another thing that gets my students engaged is when we do indoor recess and I get on Go Noodle with them. I dance with them, I sing with them, I learn all the songs they like. Also, sometimes I do my presentations for class where I make it where it's like gamer style. And so a lot of my kids in second grade are really big on Fortnite and things like that. And so we make our presentations designed around that. We try to make it gamer style. We try to incorporate characters that they like, things that they like, songs that they like. I try to listen to some of the music that they listen to and learn the top dances, the dance crazes and things like that. So that's another tip for getting your students engaged. And a lot of times, if you do this tip number 2, let out your inner child, you've hooked and baited your kids for the rest of the school year. So once you get that inner child out and they see you as a real person, not only as their teacher and an authority figure, they see you as a person just like them that loves things that they like. Then they engage, then they listen, then they pay attention. All right, next tip is tip number 3. You are the greatest performer of all times. I always tell this to my teacher friends. I always say, teachers are the biggest actresses and actors. We should really be getting paid for the performances that we do every day. So as we walk into a classroom, we know that we're gonna have to put on a grand performance to keep these kids' attention all day. With the way that society is today, with kids being on video games, technology is taking over, all of these different things, is getting harder for the classroom teacher to maintain the attention of her students. And so what you have to do is change your mindset and change the way that you think about how you bring and deliver content to your students. This is what you do when you differentiate. And so what you're going to be doing is differentiating your presentation style. And in differentiating your presentation style, you're waking up your kids' brains, you're waking them up to the things that you're about to deliver. And then you put on the performance of all time for that lesson for that day. And so most times the way that I practice for my performance for the next day is I do what's called mirror moves. I stand in front of my mirror and I run through my entire lesson for the next day. So I walk through all the steps. I anticipate all of the responses. I think about which student might say what, and then I respond in the way that I think that I could maybe help move the discussion along a little bit further. So basically, I'm spending my time in front of that mirror, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 10, depends on the type of lesson, but I'm doing my mirror moves and I'm getting myself planned, prepped, and ready for the next day for my great performance. So that was tip number 3, be the greatest performer of all time. Tip number 4, be patient. Teaching kids requires a lot of patience. You are never going to get things done in a fast amount of time. When you're dealing with students, teachers have to practice a due diligence. That patience is going to be imperative to getting them to where you want them to be. So one of the things that I do is I give my kids wait time. And I anticipate their learning difficulties. I anticipate their learning rates. All too often as an evaluator of teachers, I've been in classrooms and I've watched teachers calling on the same students all the time because they know these are the students that can answer the questions and it's going to make them look good. Don't worry about looking good. Worry about the academic feedback and the things that you can provide to move a student who doesn't know the correct answer along to the right answer. So some of the things that I use to get this done is I use Class Dojo has a teacher toolbox. And in that teacher toolbox, there's tons of things like random name picker. So I have all my little students in there and they get their dojo monster and then I pull it up on the board. And so instead of using the old little popsicle sticks out of the cup or the jar, I have the random picker technology base and it pops up someone's name and then I ask the question. That way I'm not calling on the same students all the time. And even if I called on little Johnny and little Johnny doesn't know the answer, then I'm giving little Johnny some wait time and allowing him to answer. So say little Johnny answers the question incorrectly. Do I say no? I say, well, Johnny, I hear what you're saying, or I think what you're trying to say is, and then I do the best that I can to try to adjust my instruction to get little Johnny to a level that he understands. You say, do you take all that time for little Johnny? Yes, I do, because when it's time for little Johnny to go do the work, he has a clearer understanding of where I was trying to get him to. Not only does little Johnny hear that same instruction, but the rest of my students are hearing that too. And they will use that same adjusted instruction and adjusted feedback to go and make adjustments in their thinking as well. So tip number 4 again was be patient. Tip number 5 is my final tip for getting your students engaged and keeping it that way. This to me is the golden tip. It's the one that I live by. And it's for you to teach them like you love them or teach them like they're your kids. Many times I have gone into classrooms where I see teachers lack in their engagement with their students. Something that I'm truly passionate about is learning everything that I can about every child that I teach. I am so strongly engaged with my students that I know all about them. I know their parents. I know what their parents do. I know where they live. I know what they like to do. I know what vacations they go on. What are their favorite foods? What are their favorite games? What are their favorite books? Trust me, I don't do this because I'm nosy. I do this because I genuinely want to know what my kids need and where I can meet them. And so I begin to develop a sense of family with those children. They become my extended family for my own children. So now my students are like my children, and every day they're with me for 8 hours a day. I spend more time with them than their parents do. A lot of times my students end up calling me mom sometimes in the middle of the day. Doesn't bother me. I just remind them I'm Miss Carr. And so what I want you to do is begin to develop a genuine rapport with your students that becomes lifelong. I have students who have gone on to college, gone on to the Navy. They send me Facebook messages. I get note cards, letters, all kinds of things from my students, my former students, and years ago, and they still remember me. That's why it's so important to know your impact with those students while they're in your classroom. It is so important to get to know them on a level that you become like family to them. And so when they're struggling, when they're not understanding something, you can reach them at their level. You can tell them, hey, Ms. Carr's here with you. We're going to struggle with this together. We're going to go through this together. So I want you to begin to teach your kids just like they're your kids. You wouldn't let your kids down. You wouldn't give up on your kids. So don't give up on them. I hope these tips have been good for you today. And I hope that you will like, subscribe, and comment below. Make sure that you subscribe to all of the videos because we're going to have so much more coming out. And keep an open mind about everything that you're doing with your students in your classroom. Again, top 5 ways to keep your students engaged. If you have any questions, you can look in my description and find my email, and I will be happy to share anything else with you beyond the watching of this video. All right, see you later, Smarty Pants.